Hello, spiritual rebels, and welcome to the forest. Now, the good news is, in the first week of being active, my channel, my little podcast, has managed to get kicked off of one platform. So I'm still available on Rumble and YouTube and Instagram. So I've got several more channels to go. I'm going to have to become more controversial so that I can live up to my name of spiritual rebel. Because if you don't incite controversy, if you don't get people to think, then what are you doing? You're not a rebel. So I will work on that. I tried for all three platforms in one week, couldn't do it. I will try harder. Now, from the questions that I have coming back at me, it's very obvious to me that there's a lot of ignorance on the subject of channeling. I thought I've cleared it up that that's not something that I'm doing here, but apparently people don't know what channeling is in general. So let's talk about that. I was around in the very early 80s when channeling became quite popular in Southern California, which was the hotbed of those who developed the New Age beliefs. Southern and Northern California, those two have quite the rivalry going on, but they both like to think of themselves as a spiritually evolved, you could say progressive if you want to, but the main idea is they see themselves on the forefront of new spiritual ideas and new directions. And channeling, after Shirley MacLaine especially came out with her endorsement of it or her experiences or her books on it, it became quite the rage. Now, I had been exploring spirituality, attempting to take control of the abilities and the gifts that I came in with, and I explored all different directions that I could as a child and as a young woman. And when this came about, when this came forward as a way of spiritual exploration, yes, I was invited to a channeling circle that met once a week. Had about 20 people, 18, 20 people in it. And I learned a lot over the 3 or 4 months that I was involved in that experience. I don't know if channeling has the same protocols today that it had back then when it was first being developed and introduced. Now, channeling in the 80s, it took a lot from spiritual mediumship, which it's different. Spiritual mediumship, which really came to, came about at the end of the, I guess it would be the end of the 1800s, going into the beginning of the 1900s. Their focus was talking to the dead, talking to those who had passed on. The mediums did often have spirit guides, ascended masters who would aid them, but their primary focus was you being able to talk to someone who'd passed on. And a lot of their work was about proving to the humans that there was spirit that survived death. I think that was their primary spiritual duty, was demonstrating and proving that to humans, so the fear of death wouldn't be as pervasive, and the grief and the unhappiness at losing a loved one could be comforted, knowing that that loved one still exists in a different plane of reality. And there were some mediums who were very good at passing messages on. Now, channelers were different, similar but different. They didn't adhere to the same protocols, and there are very rigid protocols that true mediums they follow. Um, You have to be trained. You have to know what those protocols are, and you have to follow them. There are some things they acknowledge that what they're doing is quite dangerous, and so they're very careful in their practices. I am not a trained spiritualist, so I won't go over all of the details of that. You can find that elsewhere. But channelers were a bit more free spirited and took, I think, a lot more risks. At that time, the belief in spirit, some of the people who practiced it didn't fully believe that what they were doing was really, really real, if you understand what I mean by that. And in some ways, they were trying to prove to themselves and to others that they had the spiritual ability, or that it was possible to attune yourself to a different dimension and to call the spirit that might be willing to work with you in that dimension into your body to speak to other people. That was what was known as channeling. And when it was introduced, at least, my understanding of it, my experience of it, you had a group of people, you created a protected space so that white light, white light of protection, a protective bubble, so that nothing could come in that had a bad intention. And so that when you reached out, when you brought a spirit forward, if it had a negative intention, if it was harmful in any way, that it wouldn't be able to manifest through the person doing the calling. The idea was you create boundaries, you create a circle that's protected, you put up spiritual energy, and you took a lot of time doing this. The people who gathered put up spiritual energy around that circle, and then often you purified the circle. In addition, you saged it, you smudged it, you cleared that circle, and then the people who were gathered were tasked with the responsibility of keeping the vibration, the energy of that circle high, to keep out, again, anything that could be problematic. The people who were seated directly next to the person who was channeling, those folks kept a special watch and a special protection energy up for the person who was channeling. And they were required to monitor the channeler so that the channeler's energy didn't get too low, and that nothing that was of a dark energy or dire energy or, again, problematic could get to that channeler, could come through that channel. If they sensed, or if they had any inkling that something like that was about to happen, they would end the session. Their job was to protect the person who was doing the risky job of calling in someone or something else. Now, normally, what was done at that time, new channelers, people who are just trying to figure out, learning how to, if they could even do that, they would invite whatever beneficent spirit who wanted to help or support or provide answers. They would put the call out, and then they would see who they would get. I don't think the people who went in with an expectation that they would speak to somebody very specific, whether it was Mother Mary, whether it was, say, an ascended master. There was a lot of folks who had specific expectations of who they thought that they would talk to. That usually wasn't the best idea. It was usually better to put out a general call and see who answered, but put out the very strong boundary that you only wanted to talk to an entity that was beneficent, that had your best interest at heart, that wanted to help or wanted to provide answers. And there are some people who are very good at it, but it takes a lot of energy. And I think most of us who attempted that found that it took way more energy than the answers provided warranted. And I was not one of those who got a good response. In my case, I would open up. I would invite um, I would invite an energy to speak with me. And the first reaction I would get from that energy, the first response when I was just dialoguing with it was state the nature of your emergency, or words to that effect. What horrible thing has happened that you need to call on me? And when I'd respond with, well, I just have some humans here with a few questions, the amount of disapproval and irritation that I would get, that I would be willing to do something as dangerous as, open myself up just to get a few random questions answered, was so strong that I quickly learned that it was better not to bother the guardians and guides that I had. If there wasn't something specific and important that I needed, they did not appreciate being called on in that way. They were willing to dialogue with me, but they were not willing to come through me. And one of the things that I discovered out of that is that the best channelers are the people with the biggest egos. If you aren't strongly centered in yourself and really believe in yourself and think that you are important and wonderful and worthy, you don't have a real strong sense of who you are. Inviting another energy in is quite dangerous, and you can get lost in that, and you can lose your strength of self if the energy you have coming in is stronger than the presence you have and the love you have for yourself and the ego, the strength of your ego. But we can talk about that next time. Thank you for sharing time with me, and welcome to the forest.